The silver pendant hanging around Amelia Pryce's neck caught the afternoon light as she stood on the auction block, her wrists bound before her, and the taste of blood lingering on her split lip. The crowd before her blurred under the harsh New Mexico sun. Faces of men gathered to bid on unmarried women brought west on the bride train of 1876. She had believed the advertisements a chance at a new life, marriage to a respectable gentleman in need of a wife. Instead, she found herself in Stein's Pass being auctioned off like cattle. Next we have Miss Amelia Pryce of Boston, age 22, called the auctioneer, a balding man with spectacles that kept sliding down his nose. Educated but willful, marked as unfit after an incident on the journey. Starting bid is $5. Amelia's incident had been defending a younger girl from the wandering hands of one of the train guards. Her reward was a blackened eye that had only recently faded and the label of troublemaker. The crowd murmured. $5 was insultingly low, even for a woman deemed problematic. But that was the point to humiliate her further. $5, called a voice from the back, belonging to a man whose leering grin made Amelia's skin crawl. $7, said another, a weathered rancher old enough to be her grandfather. The bidding continued half-heartedly, reaching $15 a quarter of what the prime women had fetched earlier. Amelia kept her gaze fixed on the distant mountains, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her fear. $20, came a new voice, deep and steady. The crowd parted, revealing a tall figure at the back. He stepped forward, sunlight glinting off spurs at his heels. Dust-covered denims, a blue shirt open at the collar, and a worn Stetson shadowing his features. When he lifted his head, Amelia caught her breath at the intensity of his eyes, blue as a summer sky and just as boundless. "Xavier Sullivan," someone whispered nearby. "What's he want with damaged goods?" The auctioneer adjusted his spectacles. $20 from Mr. Sullivan. Do I hear 25? Silence fell. Nobody wanted to challenge the tall cowboy whose reputation, while unknown to Amelia, clearly commanded respect. 20 going once, going twice. "Hold on," interrupted a portly man in a fine suit. "This one's marked unfit. Might be pretty, but she's trouble. Sullivan should know what he's bidding on." The cowboy's gaze never left Amelia's face. "I'll be the judge of that," he said, his voice carrying across the square. Something fluttered in Amelia's chest, not hope. She'd learned better than that, but perhaps its distant cousin. "Sold." The auctioneer's gavel fell with a crack that echoed through the square. "To Mr. Sullivan for $20. Xavier Sullivan approached the auction block, counting out bills from a leather wallet. His movements were unhurried, deliberate. When he finished his transaction, he climbed the steps to where Amelia stood. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, not from age, for he couldn't be much beyond 30, but from squinting against sun and wind. His face was weathered but handsome, with a strong jaw partially concealed by several days' stubble. "Miss Pryce," he said quietly, reaching for her bound hands. She flinched away instinctively. "I am not property," she hissed, low enough that only he could hear. "Whatever you've purchased, it isn't me." Something unexpected flickered across his features. Respect, perhaps. "I know that," he replied, producing a knife from his belt. With one swift movement, he cut the ropes binding her wrists. "But this was the only way to get you off that platform." The auctioneer cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Sullivan, the paperwork. I'll collect it later," Xavier replied without looking away from Amelia. "Miss Pryce needs medical attention for her wrists." Indeed, the ropes had left angry red welts where they had chafed against her skin. Xavier offered his hand, but didn't force it when she ignored it, instead descending the steps on her own. The crowd had already begun to disperse. attention moving to the next lot. No one cared much about the fate of a woman deemed troublesome. Amelia followed Xavier away from the auction block, acutely aware that she had nowhere else to go. Her meager belongings, a single carpet bag, had been confiscated upon arrival. "Why?" she asked when they were out of earshot. "Why would you waste your money on someone marked as unfit?" Xavier's pace slowed to match hers. "Because I recognized the look in your eyes. It wasn't defeat." Amelia stumbled slightly, surprised by his answer. "And that's a quality worth $20. That's a quality you can't put a price on." He gestured toward a hitching post where a magnificent chestnut stallion waited patiently. "That's Buck. My ranch is about 3 miles outside of town." Alarm flashed through her. "I'm not going to your ranch. Where would you prefer to go, Miss Pryce? You have no money, no connections, and this town isn't kind to women without protection." His tone wasn't threatening, merely matter of fact. "I have a proposition for you, but I'd rather discuss it somewhere other than the middle of the street." Amelia glanced around at the dusty main thoroughfare of Stein's Pass. Several men watched them with undisguised interest, and she recognized at least 2 who had bid on her earlier. "I need my belongings," she said finally. Xavier nodded. "Where are they being held?" "The station master's office." "But they won't release them to me without—" She stopped, the humiliation of her situation washing over her anew. "Without proof of purchase," he finished grimly. "Wait here." He strode toward the station, his long legs carrying him swiftly across the street. Amelia considered running, but the practical part of her brain, the part that had kept her alive this far, reminded her that she had nowhere to go. Better to hear this mysterious proposition than to flee blindly into the desert. Xavier returned minutes later with her carpet bag. "Got your things," he said, handing it to her, "and the paperwork." He pulled a folded document from his pocket and, to her astonishment, tore it in half. "What are you doing?" she gasped. "Making a point," he replied, tearing it again before pocketing the pieces. "That paper doesn't make you mine. Now, are you coming willingly to hear my proposition, or would you prefer to take your chances in town?" Amelia clutched her carpet bag. "I'll hear your proposition, Mr. Sullivan, but I make no promises beyond that." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "That's fair." He untied his horse, then surprised her by handing her the reins. "You ride, Buck. I'll walk alongside. You're giving me your horse." The suspicion in her voice was evident. "I'm letting you ride my horse," he corrected. "There's a difference. Buck only answers to me, so don't get any ideas about galloping off." Amelia felt color rise to her cheeks at being so easily rayed. "I wasn't—" "Yes, you were. I'd be thinking the same in your position." He offered his cupped hands to help her mount. "But I'm not your enemy, Miss Pryce." After a moment's hesitation, she placed her boot in his hands and let him boost her up. The stallion shifted slightly but remained calm as she arranged her skirts as modestly as possible. Xavier took the reins but didn't mount, instead beginning to walk. The horse followed obediently, and Amelia found herself several feet above her unexpected benefactor, watching the back of his broad shoulders as he led the way out of town. The sun beat down mercilessly as they traveled, but Xavier maintained a steady pace. Occasionally, he would point out landmarks, a distinctive rock formation, a cluster of cacti that marked the turn toward his property. Amelia remained largely silent, still wary despite his unexpected kindness. "May I ask what brought you west?" he said finally, breaking the silence. Amelia hesitated before answering. "My parents died in a fire last winter. I was teaching at a small school, but—" She trailed off, unwilling to explain how the headmaster's son had cornered her one evening and how her rejection of his advances had cost her the position. "But circumstances changed," Xavier supplied. "Yes." She was grateful for his understanding. The advertisements promised respectable matches. Many women in Boston have few prospects after the war took so many men. Xavier nodded. The companies that run those bride trains make a lot of promises. They deliver women, take their fees, and don't much care what happens after. I've learned that lesson quite thoroughly, Amelia replied bitterly. What about you, Mr. Sullivan? What's your story? He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Came west after Appomattox. Didn't want to go back to Tennessee. Worked cattle drives for years before winning some land in a poker game from a man too drunk to know better. You fought for the Confederacy, she asked, tension creeping into her voice. I fought because I was 17 and stupid, he replied evenly. Lost 2 brothers and learned war isn't glorious, just necessary sometimes. But I don't expect you to understand that, coming from Boston. You might be surprised what I understand, she murmured, thinking of her brother who never returned from Gettysburg. They rounded a bend in the trail and Amelia's breath caught. Before them lay a small valley, green with spring growth. A creek wound through it, and nestled near its banks stood a ranch house not grand, but solid and well-maintained. Several outbuildings dotted the property and a corral held half a dozen horses. In the distance, cattle grazed on the hillsides. Welcome to Willow Creek Ranch, Xavier said, a note of pride in his voice. It's beautiful, Amelia admitted, genuinely impressed. You've done well for yourself, Mr. Sullivan. Xavier, he corrected. If you're going to stay here, you might as well use my given name. She stiffened. I haven't agreed to stay anywhere yet, true enough. He led Buck toward the house. But you will at least stay for supper and hear me out. As they approached the ranch house, the front door opened, and an elderly woman emerged, wiping her hands on an apron. Her weathered face broke into a smile when she spotted them. Xavier Sullivan, I was beginning to worry. Did you get the supplies I needed? Her eyes widened when she spotted Amelia. And who might this be? Mrs. Hattie Wilkins. Meet Miss Amelia Pryce. Xavier introduced them. Miss Pryce, this is Mrs. Wilkins, my housekeeper and the closest thing to civilization this ranch has seen. Hattie Wilkins humphed at that description but smiled warmly at Amelia. Welcome, child. You look like you could use a good meal and a bath. Xavier helped Amelia dismount, his hands strong and sure at her waist. Mrs. Wilkins, would you show Miss Pryce to the guest room and help her get settled? I need to see to Buck and bring in her bag, of course. Hattie beckoned to Amelia. Come along, dear. That dress has seen better days. Amelia hesitated. Mr. Sullivan, your proposition. After supper, he promised. Rest first, you're safe here. Strangely, she believed him, though she couldn't have explained why. Perhaps it was the presence of Mrs. Wilkins, or perhaps it was the way he had torn up the auction document without hesitation. Either way, she followed the older woman into the house, her curiosity about Xavier Sullivan's proposition growing with each step. The interior of the ranch house surprised Amelia. While not luxurious, it was clean and well-ordered, with solid furniture and touches of comfort curtains at the windows, a braided rug before the hearth, bookshelves lined with volumes. This was not the sparse bachelor dwelling she had expected. The guest room is this way, Mrs. Wilkins said, leading her down a short hallway. It doesn't get much use, but I keep it ready. The room was small but pleasant, with a narrow bed covered in a colorful quilt, a washstand with pitcher and basin, and a chest of drawers. A window overlooked the creek, where willows swayed in the breeze. I'll bring hot water for a bath, Mrs. Wilkins offered. Xavier had a proper bathtub brought in from El Paso last year, said he was tired of bathing in a horse trough. Her eyes twinkled with amusement. That boy has some civilized notions for all his rough edges. Mrs. Wilkins, Amelia began hesitantly, may I ask, what exactly is my position here? The older woman's expression softened. Xavier didn't explain. He said he has a proposition, but we haven't discussed details. Well, it's not my place to speak for him, but I can tell you this Xavier Sullivan is a good man. Stubborn as a mule and about as talkative as one, but good to the core. She patted Amelia's hand. Rest easy. Whatever he's proposing, it won't be anything to fear. With that cryptic reassurance, Mrs. Wilkins left to prepare the bath. Alone for the first time since the auction, Amelia sank onto the bed, emotions she'd been suppressing threatening to overflow. The past weeks had been a nightmare, from the cramped, uncomfortable journey west to the increasingly predatory behavior of the train guards, culminating in her humiliation on the auction block. Yet here she was, in a clean room, about to have a proper bath, with no immediate threats to her safety. The relief was almost dizzying. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Xavier stood there, her carpetbag in hand. "Your belongings," he said simply, placing the bag inside the door without entering. "Thank you." Amelia cleared her throat. "Mr. Sullivan, Xavier, I still don't understand why you did this." He leaned against the doorframe, regarding her thoughtfully. "Let's just say I've seen enough injustice to last several lifetimes. We'll talk after you've rested." With that, he departed, leaving Amelia to prepare for her bath. Mrs. Wilkins returned with two young Mexican boys carrying buckets of steaming water, which they poured into a copper tub set up behind a screen in the corner of the room. "Take your time, dear," Mrs. Wilkins said, laying out a towel and a bar of soap that smelled of lavender. "Supper won't be for another hour." Left alone again, Amelia undressed quickly and slipped into the bath, sighing as the hot water enveloped her aching body. She scrubbed away the dust of travel and the taint of the auction block, wishing she could as easily wash away the memories. Afterward, she unpacked her meager possessions, 2 dresses besides the one she'd been wearing, undergarments, a hairbrush, a small sewing kit, a worn Bible that had belonged to her mother, and a daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day. At the bottom of the bag lay her most treasured possession, a journal filled with her own poems and stories, written in secret moments during the journey west. Amelia chose her best dress, a simple blue cotton with white piping at the collar and cuffs, and pinned up her damp hair as neatly as possible. The face that looked back at her from the small mirror above the washstand was thinner than it had been in Boston, the cheekbones more pronounced, but her hazel eyes were clear and determined. Whatever Xavier Sullivan's proposition might be, she would face it with dignity. When she emerged from the guest room, delicious smells guided her to the kitchen at the back of the house. Mrs. Wilkins was placing a roast on the table, while Xavier, freshly washed and changed into clean clothes, was setting out plates. "Perfect timing," he said when he spotted her. "Mrs. Wilkins makes the best venison roast in the territory." "It's just dinner," the older woman scoffed, but Amelia could tell she was pleased by the compliment. "Sit down, both of you, before it gets cold." The meal passed pleasantly enough, with Mrs. Wilkins carrying most of the conversation. Amelia learned that the housekeeper was a widow whose husband had been killed in a mining accident several years earlier. Xavier had hired her when he first acquired the ranch, saving her from having to return east to relatives she barely knew. "Best decision I ever made," Xavier said, helping himself to more potatoes. "Mrs. Wilkins runs this place better than I ever could." "Nonsense," the housekeeper replied. "You've built something fine here, Xavier Sullivan. Don't sell yourself short." As they finished the meal with apple pie, Amelia noticed Xavier growing quieter, his expression thoughtful. When Mrs. Wilkins began clearing the plates, he finally broke his silence. "Mrs. Wilkins, would you give Miss Pryce and me a moment to talk privately?" "Of course." The housekeeper gathered the last of the dishes. I'll just take these to the kitchen." When she had gone, Xavier gestured toward the front of the house. "Shall we sit in the parlor? It's more comfortable for conversation." Amelia nodded and followed him to a small sitting area with 2 armchairs flanking the fireplace. Though the evening was warm enough that no fire was needed, the setting felt oddly intimate. She perched on the edge of one chair, her back straight, hands folded in her lap. Xavier took the other chair, stretching his long legs out before him. For a moment he seemed to struggle with how to begin. "You mentioned a proposition," Amelia prompted. "Yes." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Miss Pryce, Amelia, if I may, I find myself in need of a teacher." Of all the things she had imagined he might say, this was not among them. A teacher. There are 7 families working on this ranch with 15 children between them. The nearest school is in town, too far for daily travel. The children help with chores, but they're growing up without proper education. His expression grew earnest. "I've been trying to find someone willing to come out here to teach, but Stein's Pass isn't exactly drawing educated people." Understanding began to dawn. "So when you saw me at the auction—" "I saw an educated woman from Boston who looked like she could stand her ground." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "The fact that they marked you as unfit only convinced me you had spirit." Amelia's mind raced. "You want to hire me as a teacher for the ranch children?" "Yes." "I can offer room and board here at the main house, plus wages, say, $30 a month. We can convert one of the outbuildings into a proper schoolroom. The families are eager for their children to learn reading, writing, arithmetic." "What about my status?" Amelia interrupted. "Legally, you purchased me at that auction." Xavier's expression hardened. "That paper I tore up. As far as I'm concerned, it never existed. You're free to accept or decline my offer. If you accept, you'll be an employee of this ranch, nothing more. If you decline, I'll give you enough money to take the next train wherever you want to go." Amelia stared at him, searching for any sign of deception. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Something like pain flickered in his blue eyes. "Because I know what it's like to have no choices. After the war, I nearly starved before finding work as a cowhand. If someone hadn't taken a chance on me then—" He shrugged. "Besides, this isn't charity. I need a teacher and you need a position. It's a fair exchange." It was more than fair, and they both knew it. Still, Amelia hesitated. "The families, will they accept me? An unmarried woman living in your house." Mrs. Wilkins serves as chaperone. "Her reputation is above reproach, and she'll vouch for the propriety of the arrangement." He paused. "The families here aren't concerned with Eastern notions of respectability. They care about survival and giving their children better opportunities than they had." Amelia thought of the school where she had taught in Boston, with its rigid rules and stifling atmosphere. She thought of the journey west, undertaken in hope of a new beginning. Could this unexpected opportunity be that beginning? "I would need to meet the families first," she said slowly, "and see where the schoolhouse would be." Xavier's face broke into a genuine smile, transforming his features. "Does that mean you're considering it?" "It means I'm not saying no immediately," she corrected, but couldn't help returning his smile. "I need to know more before I decide." "Fair enough." He rose from his chair. "We can ride out tomorrow to meet the families and show you around the ranch. For tonight, get some rest. You're safe here, Amelia. I promise you that." The sincerity in his voice stirred something inside her, a tentative trust she had not expected to feel so soon. "Thank you, Xavier, for everything." He nodded once, almost awkwardly, then wished her good night and left her alone with her thoughts. In the guest room, Amelia opened her journal and began to write, trying to make sense of the day's extraordinary events. From the auction block to a potential teaching position in the span of hours, it seemed almost like a dream. Yet Xavier Sullivan's proposition offered something precious. Independence. Not the false promise of the bride advertisements, but a chance to use her education and support herself. As she drifted to sleep that night, Amelia realized something surprising. For the first time since leaving Boston, she felt hopeful about the future. Morning arrived with the crowing of a rooster and the smell of coffee and bacon wafting through the house. Amelia dressed quickly and made her way to the kitchen, where Mrs. Wilkins was frying eggs. "Good morning, dear," the housekeeper greeted her. "Did you sleep well? Better than I have in weeks," Amelia admitted, accepting a cup of coffee. "Is Xavier awake?" "Been up for hours. That man rises before the sun." Mrs. Wilkins nodded toward the window, where Amelia could see Xavier in the corral, working with a young horse. Even from a distance, she could appreciate the skill with which he handled the animal, firm but gentle, never harsh. "He told me about the teaching position," Amelia said, watching as Xavier guided the horse through a series of maneuvers. Mrs. Wilkins nodded. "Those children need schooling badly. Xavier's been teaching the older ones basic reading himself when he has time, but it's not enough. He seems unusually concerned with education for a rancher," Amelia observed. "Xavier's not your typical cowboy," Mrs. Wilkins replied, placing a plate of eggs and bacon before her. "His father was a schoolteacher before the war. Education matters to him." This new piece of information added another layer to the enigma that was Xavier Sullivan. Amelia ate her breakfast thoughtfully, watching through the window as he finished with the horse and headed toward the house. He entered the kitchen a few minutes later, removing his hat. "Morning, ladies. I see Mrs. Wilkins is taking good care of you, Amelia." "The best," Amelia agreed. "I understand we're visiting the families today," Xavier nodded, accepting a plate from Mrs. Wilkins. "Thought we'd ride out after breakfast. The Mendez family is closest. They have 3 children. Then the Garcias, the Johnsons, and so on." He smiled slightly. "Hope you're comfortable on horseback. It's the only practical way to get around the ranch." "I grew up riding in the country outside Boston," Amelia assured him, "though it's been some time since I was in a saddle. I've got a gentle mare that will suit you fine." He ate quickly, with the efficiency of a man accustomed to making the most of daylight hours. "Ready when you are." An hour later, they were riding across the rolling landscape of Willow Creek Ranch. Xavier had provided Amelia with a gentle bay mare named Daisy, who responded to the lightest touch of the reins. Xavier rode Buck, the powerful chestnut stallion, keeping an easy pace beside Daisy. "The ranch covers about 2,000 acres, Xavier explained as they rode. "Not the biggest in the territory, but good land with reliable water. We run about 500 head of cattle, plus the horses I breed and train." "It's impressive," Amelia said, genuinely meaning it, "especially for someone who started with nothing after the war." "Had some luck and a lot of help." He gestured toward a distant ridge. "The Mendez family lives just beyond that rise. Ernesto Mendez is my foreman, been with me almost from the beginning." As they crested the ridge, Amelia saw a neat adobe house with a vegetable garden and a small corral. A woman was hanging laundry while several children played nearby. At the sight of the riders, the woman called out something in Spanish, and a man emerged from a nearby shed. "Ernesto," Xavier called, raising a hand in greeting. The Mendez family welcomed them warmly, offering cool water and shade. Ernesto, a dignified man in his 40s, listened intently as Xavier explained Amelia's potential role as teacher. "This would be a blessing," he said in accented but clear English. "Our children, they need learning to have better chances." He introduced his wife, Maria, and their 3 children, Miguel, 10, Sofia, 8, and little Tomás, 6. All 3 regarded Amelia with wide, curious eyes. "You know stories?" Sofia asked boldly. Our papa tells stories, but we want new ones. Amelia smiled. I know many stories, and I could teach you to read so you could discover even more for yourselves. The child's face lit up, and Amelia felt a familiar warmth, the satisfaction of connecting with an eager young mind. It was why she had become a teacher in the first place. Throughout the day, they visited the other families scattered across the ranch. The Garcias had 4 children. The Johnsons, a family from Missouri who had come west after the war, had 3. The Williamses had 2. And there were 3 more families, each with at least 1 child of school age. Everywhere they went, Amelia was struck by the same thing. These families might have little in terms of material possessions, but they valued education and welcomed her potential contribution with genuine enthusiasm. By late afternoon, when they finally turned back toward the main house, Amelia had made her decision. "I'll take the position," she told Xavier as they rode side by side. "Those children deserve a chance to learn, and I—" She hesitated, then continued honestly, "I need this opportunity. A chance to be useful, to be independent." Xavier's expression was one of quiet satisfaction. "I'm glad. The families will be too." He paused. "There's an old storage building near the creek that would make a good schoolhouse. Sturdy walls, good light. We can fix it up over the next few weeks. I'll need supplies, books, slates, chalk, paper. Make a list of what you need. I'm sending a wagon to El Paso next week for supplies. We can have everything ready to start lessons by the end of the month." Amelia nodded, excitement building within her. This was nothing like what she had expected when she came west, but perhaps it was better, a position earned by her abilities, not her marriageability. As they approached the ranch house, the setting sun bathed everything in golden light. Xavier reined Buck to a stop, gazing out over his property. "When I first saw this land," he said quietly, "I couldn't believe it could be mine. After years of sleeping under stars and eating trail dust, the idea of something permanent seemed impossible." He glanced at her. "I know it's not what you came west for, but I hope Willow Creek might become something permanent for you too, Amelia." The sincerity in his voice touched her. "Thank you for the chance to find out." The following weeks passed in a flurry of activity as preparations for the school moved forward. The storage building was cleared, cleaned, and transformed. New windows were cut into the thick adobe walls to allow more light, and Xavier's ranch hands constructed simple benches and desks. Amelia worked alongside them, directing the layout and insisting on a proper blackboard mounted on the wall. The supplies she had requested arrived from El Paso: slates and chalk for each child, primers and readers, paper and pencils, even a globe and several maps that Xavier had added to her list without telling her. "You didn't have to do that," she said when she discovered the additions. "Globes are expensive. Hard to understand the world without seeing it," he replied with a shrug. "Besides, these children might never travel beyond New Mexico. Least we can do is show them what's out there." Such moments revealed more of Xavier Sullivan's character to Amelia. Despite his rough exterior and taciturn manner, he possessed a thoughtfulness that surprised and intrigued her. He rarely spoke of his past, yet his actions, his respect for education, his fair treatment of the families working his land, his unexpected gentleness with animals told a story of their own. On the eve of the school's opening, Amelia sat on the front porch of the ranch house, reviewing her lesson plans one last time. The evening was cool, with a breeze rustling through the willows along the creek. She had grown to love this time of day, when the harsh sunlight softened and the land seemed to exhale after the heat of the afternoon. Xavier joined her, offering a cup of coffee. "Nervous about tomorrow?" "A little," she admitted, accepting the cup. It's been some time since I taught, and never with such a range of ages and backgrounds. You'll do fine. He settled into the chair beside hers, stretching his long legs before him. Those children already adore you. It was true. During her visits to prepare the families for school, the children had followed her around, asking questions and showing her treasures: a bird's nest, a pretty stone, a doll made of corn husks. Their eagerness to learn touched her deeply. "I'm grateful for this opportunity," she said quietly. "When I came west, I never imagined ending up in the middle of nowhere teaching ranch children." He finished with a rare smile. "Being respected for my mind rather than valued for my potential as a wife," she corrected. "That auction." She shuddered at the memory. Xavier's expression darkened. "Those bride auctions are a disgrace. Not the first time I've interfered, though usually I just help the women get to where they really want to go." "You've done this before?" Amelia asked, surprised. He shrugged uncomfortably. "A few times. My sister was widowed during the war, left with 2 small children. She had to remarry quickly a man who—" He trailed off, his jaw tightening. "He wasn't kind. She didn't have choices." Understanding dawned. "So you help women have choices, when I can." He stared out at the darkening landscape. "No one should be forced into a life they don't want." In that moment, Amelia saw Xavier Sullivan more clearly than ever before, not just as her employer or benefactor, but as a man whose compassion ran deeper than his rough exterior suggested. Something shifted inside her, a warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee in her hands. "Thank you," she said simply, "for giving me a choice." Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, Amelia felt a connection that transcended their formal relationship. Then Xavier cleared his throat and stood up. "Better get some rest. Big day tomorrow." As he walked back into the house, Amelia remained on the porch, watching as the first stars appeared in the twilight sky. She had come west seeking security through marriage. Instead, she had found independence and perhaps the beginnings of something she hadn't been looking for at all. The school's opening day arrived bright and clear. Amelia woke at dawn, too excited and nervous to sleep any longer. She dressed carefully in her best dress, pinned up her hair neatly, and packed a lunch that Mrs. Wilkins had prepared the night before. When she emerged from her room, she found Xavier waiting in the kitchen, a wrapped package in his hands. "A small gift," he said, holding it out to her. "For the teacher." Surprised, Amelia unwrapped the package to find a beautiful brass bell, its handle polished to a shine. "Every school needs a bell," Xavier explained, looking slightly embarrassed by his gesture, "for calling the children in from recess and such." Amelia ran her finger over the smooth brass surface. "It's perfect. Thank you." They walked together to the schoolhouse, the morning air still cool and fragrant with sage. Already, several families were arriving, some on horseback, others in wagons, all dressed in their best clothes for the occasion. The children's faces shone with excitement and nervousness in equal measure. Xavier stood back as Amelia greeted each family, but she was aware of his presence, solid and reassuring. When all 15 children had assembled, ranging in age from 6 to 14, she rang her new bell for the first time. "Welcome to Willow Creek School," she announced, her voice clear in the morning air. "I'm Miss Pryce, and I'm honored to be your teacher." As the children filed into the schoolhouse, their parents watching proudly, Amelia caught Xavier's eye. He nodded once, a gesture of confidence, before turning back toward the main house. This was her domain now, and he respected that. The first day passed in a blur of introductions, assessments, and establishing routines. As Amelia had expected, the children's educational backgrounds varied widely. 10-year-old Miguel Mendez could already read simple texts in both Spanish and English, while 14-year-old Thomas Johnson, despite his age, struggled to recognize letters. Some of the younger children had never held a pencil before. Yet all shared a hunger to learn that made Amelia's heart swell. By the end of the day, when she rang the bell to dismiss class, she felt both exhausted and exhilarated. The children scattered to their waiting families, chattering excitedly about their first day. Amelia stood in the schoolhouse doorway watching them go, a deep sense of satisfaction settling over her. "Seems like a success," came Xavier's voice from behind her. She turned to find him leaning against the side of the building, his expression one of quiet approval. "It was," she agreed. "They're wonderful children, eager to learn, respectful." She smiled. "Miguel Mendez might be teaching me Spanish before long. His grandmother was a schoolteacher in Sonora before the border troubles forced them north," Xavier said. "Education runs in the family." They walked back to the main house together, Amelia describing the day's events and her plans for the curriculum. Xavier listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions about how he might support her efforts. "I was thinking," he said as they neared the house, "we might host a harvest celebration when autumn comes. Give the children a chance to show what they've learned. Maybe invite folks from town." "That's a wonderful idea," Amelia enthused. "They'll have a goal to work toward and their parents can see their progress." Xavier smiled at her excitement. "You were born to teach, weren't you?" "I suppose I was." She looked up at him curiously. "What about you? Were you born to be a rancher?" He laughed, a rich sound that Amelia realized she'd heard too rarely. "Hardly. My father would have had me follow in his footsteps as a teacher, but I was always more comfortable outdoors than in a classroom. Yet you value education enough to establish a school on your ranch." "Just because I wasn't suited to teaching doesn't mean I don't respect it," he replied. "Besides, what's the point of all this?" He gestured at the ranch spreading around them, "if it doesn't make life better for everyone here." That evening, as Amelia prepared for bed, she reflected on how much her life had changed in the short time since the auction. From the depths of humiliation and uncertainty to the satisfaction of meaningful work and growing respect, it was a transformation she could scarcely have imagined. And at the center of that transformation stood Xavier Sullivan, the quiet cowboy whose unexpected intervention had changed her path so dramatically. The weeks passed, settling into a rhythm. Each morning, Amelia rang her brass bell to start the school day. The children arrived eager to learn, and she found herself constantly adapting her teaching to their varied needs and abilities. Afternoons often included practical lessons using mathematics to calculate the dimensions of the garden plot they were preparing, or studying the local plants and animals in impromptu science classes. Xavier kept his distance during school hours, respecting her authority, but often found reasons to stop by as classes ended. Sometimes he would listen as an older student read aloud from a book, or examine the younger children's drawings with genuine interest. His presence became a highlight of Amelia's day, though she was careful not to examine that feeling too closely. In the evenings, they often sat on the porch after supper, discussing the day's events. These conversations gradually expanded to include more personal topics, books they had read, places they had seen, even cautious mentions of their families, and the war that had shaped both their lives so profoundly. "My brother Joseph died at Gettysburg," Amelia confided one evening, the words emerging more easily in the gathering darkness. "He was 22. My parents never really recovered from losing him." Xavier was quiet for a long moment. "My youngest brother fell at Shiloh, just 19. My other brother came home missing an arm and most of his spirit. Died 2 years later, pneumonia, they said, but I think he just didn't want to live in the world that was left. "I'm sorry," Amelia said softly, understanding the weight of such losses. "Is that why you came west?" "To leave those memories behind, partly." His voice was low in the darkness. "Partly because there was nothing left for me in Tennessee. Our farm was burned, my parents died during the war, and the world I knew was gone. Out here a man could start fresh, be judged by what he did rather than which side he'd fought for." "And you've built something remarkable," Amelia observed, looking out over the ranch silvered by moonlight. "Something to be proud of." "Most days," he agreed. "What about you?" "If the bride train had delivered what it promised, a respectable husband in the West, would you have been content?" The question caught her off guard. I don't know. I came west because I had few options left in Boston, not because I was eager to marry. But I told myself a good marriage could bring security, perhaps eventually contentment, but not love." There was something in his tone she couldn't quite identify. "Love seemed a luxury I couldn't afford to consider," she admitted. "Security was more important." Xavier shifted in his chair. "And now you have security of a sort here." "I do," Amelia agreed, heart beating slightly faster. "More than that, I have purpose, independence." "No regrets, then?" His voice was careful, neutral. "None," she said firmly, and meant it. As summer progressed into autumn, life at Willow Creek settled into comfortable patterns. The school thrived, with the children making remarkable progress. Even Thomas Johnson, who had struggled so much at first, was now reading simple texts with growing confidence. The harvest celebration Xavier had suggested was scheduled for late October, and the children were preparing special presentations to show their parents and neighbors what they had learned. Amelia's relationship with Xavier continued to deepen, though neither acknowledged the growing attraction between them. Their evening conversations on the porch became a cherished ritual, sometimes lasting well into the night as they discovered shared interests and values beneath their very different backgrounds. Yet both maintained a careful distance, because she valued her newfound independence too much to risk it. He because he respected that independence and would not presume upon it. The situation might have continued indefinitely in this holding pattern, had events not intervened one stormy afternoon in early October. The day had begun with ominous clouds building on the horizon. By noon, thunder was rumbling in the distance, and Amelia had decided to dismiss school early to ensure the children could reach home before the storm broke. Xavier had arrived just as she was closing up the schoolhouse, having come to check on her. "Storm's moving fast," he observed, looking at the darkening sky. "Johnson Creek might flood if this is as bad as it looks." Johnson Creek was the larger waterway that fed the stream running past the ranch house. When it flooded, it could cut off access to several of the family's homes. "Should we warn them?" Amelia asked, concerned. "Already sent Ernesto to tell everyone to stay put once they get home." He offered her his arm. "Let's get back to the house before this breaks." They had barely reached the front porch when the skies opened, rain sheeting down with remarkable intensity. Within minutes, the yard had become a sea of mud, and the creek was visibly rising. "Never seen it come this fast, Mrs. Wilkins said worriedly, peering out the window as she prepared coffee. "Xavier, you'd better check that the horses are secure in the barn." He nodded, pulling on his slicker. "Stay inside," he told Amelia. "This is going to get worse before it gets better." For hours the storm raged. Xavier came and went, soaked to the skin despite his rain gear, checking on animals and outbuildings. By late afternoon, the creek had overflowed its banks, and water was creeping across the lower fields. "The schoolhouse?" Amelia asked anxiously when Xavier returned from one foray into the storm. On high enough ground, he assured her, accepting the towel Mrs. Wilkins handed him. But Johnson Creek is out of its banks. The bridge to the Williamses' place may be underwater. Just then, a pounding came at the front door. Xavier opened it to find Miguel Mendez, drenched and frightened. "Mr. Sullivan," the boy gasped. "My papa says the Williamses are in trouble. Their house is in the flood path and Mrs. Williams is having her baby." Xavier's expression turned grim. "When did this start?" "This morning, Papa says." "Mr. Williams rode for the doctor in town, but he hasn't come back and now the bridge is gone. Mrs. Wilkins," Xavier turned to the housekeeper, "prepare a room upstairs. Miguel, tell your father to gather whatever men he can safely reach. I'll saddle Buck and go to the Williamses." "I'm coming with you," Amelia said firmly, already reaching for her coat. Xavier shook his head. "Too dangerous. Buck can carry me through the floodwaters, but Sarah Williams needs a woman's help," Amelia interrupted. "I've assisted at births before." "You can't leave her alone with just her frightened children." For a moment they locked eyes, a silent battle of wills. Then Xavier nodded curtly. "We'll take 2 horses. Daisy's sure-footed, but you follow my lead exactly. Understood?" "Understood." Minutes later, they were riding through the storm, rain lashing at their faces. Xavier led the way, guiding Buck through the safest path across the flooded land. Amelia followed on Daisy, trying to project more confidence than she felt as the mare splashed through water that sometimes reached her knees. The Williamses' small cabin came into view, perched on a slight rise but with water already lapping at its foundations. A terrified-looking boy of about 9 stood on the porch, waving frantically when he spotted them. "She's screaming something awful," he called as they approached. "And the water's coming in under the door." Xavier dismounted in one fluid motion, helping Amelia down from Daisy. "Tie the horses to the porch rail high up," he instructed. "Matthew, where's your sister?" "In there with Ma," the boy replied, pointing toward the cabin door. Inside, they found Sarah Williams on a bed in the corner, her face contorted with pain, her 11-year-old daughter Emma trying desperately to comfort her. The floor was indeed wet, with water seeping in beneath the ill-fitting door. "Thank God," Sarah gasped when she saw them. "The baby's coming fast and Jim's not back." "He's probably waiting out the storm in town," Xavier reassured her, though his expression suggested he feared worse. "Miss Pryce is here to help you, and I'm going to make sure your home stays dry." Amelia moved to Sarah's side, taking charge with a calm authority that belied her own anxiety. "Emma, I need clean cloths and hot water if possible. Matthew can help Mr. Sullivan." For the next hour, Amelia guided Sarah through increasingly rapid contractions, while Xavier and Matthew worked frantically to divert water from the cabin, piling sandbags against the door and digging a trench to channel the flow away from the foundation. Outside, the storm continued unabated, but inside the small cabin, a more elemental drama was unfolding. Sarah's labor progressed quickly, and Amelia found herself drawing on half-remembered instructions from the midwife who had delivered her cousin's children years before. "You're doing wonderfully," she encouraged Sarah as another contraction peaked. "The baby is coming now, just a little longer." Xavier had stationed himself by the door, giving the women privacy while remaining close enough to help if needed. When Sarah's scream gave way to a different sound, the unmistakable cry of a newborn, his head snapped up, eyes meeting Amelia's across the room. "It's a boy," she announced, wrapping the squalling infant in a clean cloth Emma had provided. "A perfect, healthy boy." The look that passed between them in that moment, relief, wonder, and something deeper that neither was ready to name, would later seem to Amelia like a turning point, though she couldn't have explained why. With the baby delivered safely and Sarah resting, Xavier approached the bedside. "Congratulations, Mrs. Williams. Your son has quite a sense of timing." Sarah managed a tired smile. "Thank you both if you hadn't come." She didn't finish the thought. Xavier squeezed her hand. "Mendez and the others should be here soon. We'll get you and the children to the main house where it's safer until this flood recedes." Indeed, within the hour, Ernesto Mendez arrived with 3 other ranch hands. Between them, they constructed a makeshift travois that could be pulled by a horse, allowing Sarah and her newborn to be transported safely despite the flooded terrain. The journey back to the ranch house was harrowing, with the water still rising and darkness falling, but Xavier led them unerringly, his knowledge of the land guiding them even when landmarks were obscured by the flood. By the time they reached the house, Amelia was exhausted, soaked to the skin, and exhilarated in a way she had never experienced. The successful delivery, the rescue, she had been tested and had not been found wanting. Mrs. Wilkins took charge of Sarah and the baby, settling them in the prepared upstairs room. The other children were fed and bedded down in the parlor, while the ranch hands departed to check on other families who might be in danger. Finally, Xavier and Amelia found themselves alone in the kitchen, dry clothes donned, hot coffee before them, the storm still raging outside but somehow less threatening now that everyone was safe. "You were magnificent today," Xavier said quietly. Amelia looked up, startled by the directness of the compliment. "I just did what needed doing." "That's precisely what makes it magnificent." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "Most people talk about helping others. Few actually step up when it's difficult or dangerous." "You did," she pointed out. "You've built your entire life around helping others, haven't you? This ranch, the school, even rescuing me from that auction." He shrugged uncomfortably. "I've just been fortunate enough to be in a position to make a difference sometimes. It's more than that." Amelia found herself leaning forward, wanting him to understand. "You create opportunities for people to build better lives. That's rare." Something shifted in Xavier's expression, a softening, a moment of vulnerability rarely glimpsed. "When I was at my lowest after the war, someone gave me a chance when they didn't have to. Changed the course of my life. I've never forgotten that." "So you pass it on," Amelia murmured. "Try to." He looked down at his coffee cup. "Though I'll admit, my motives weren't entirely altruistic when I bid on you at that auction." Amelia's heart stuttered. "What do you mean?" Xavier met her eyes again, a flush of color rising in his weathered cheeks. "I needed a teacher, yes. But when I saw you standing there, head high despite everything, I was drawn to your spirit before I knew anything else about you." The admission hung between them, altering the very air in the room. Amelia found herself at a loss for words, emotions she had been carefully containing threatening to overflow. "I should check on Sarah and the baby," she said finally, rising from her chair. Xavier nodded, accepting her retreat. "Of course." That night, as Amelia lay in bed listening to the storm gradually subsiding, she confronted the truth she had been avoiding for weeks. She was falling in love with Xavier Sullivan, his quiet strength, his compassion, his unwavering integrity. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. She had come west seeking security through marriage, only to find herself valuing independence instead. Now, paradoxically, she found herself contemplating a different kind of partnership, one based on mutual respect and shared purpose rather than mere economic necessity. But did Xavier feel the same? His admission in the kitchen suggested attraction, perhaps even deeper feelings. Yet he had been scrupulously careful to maintain appropriate boundaries between them, respecting her position and her independence. As dawn broke, Bringing clear skies after the storm, Amelia made a decision. She would wait and observe. The harvest celebration was only weeks away. Perhaps by then she would better understand her own heart and his. The days following the storm were busy with cleanup and repairs. The flood had damaged fences, washed out sections of road, and left debris scattered across the lower pastures. Everyone on the ranch pitched in to restore order, with even the school children helping after lessons each day. Sarah Williams and her baby named Xavier James after the man who had helped save them remained at the main house until Jim Williams returned. He had indeed been stranded in town by the washed-out bridge, frantic with worry about his family. The reunion was joyous, with much crying and embracing, and Amelia found herself wiping away tears at the sight of the family together again. Through it all, she and Xavier worked side by side, their interaction outwardly unchanged. Yet Amelia was acutely aware of a new undercurrent between them, glances that lingered, hands that brushed seemingly by accident, conversations that carried deeper meaning beneath ordinary words. One evening, about a week after the storm, Amelia was grading papers at the kitchen table when Xavier entered, carrying a small package. "Letter came for you," he said, placing it before her. "From Boston." Surprised, Amelia examined the package. The return address belonged to her former colleague at the school where she had taught. "Would you like privacy?" Xavier asked, turning to leave. "No, stay," she replied, curiosity overcoming her. "I'd like to know what Margaret has to say." Inside the package was a letter and a small book of poetry. Amelia read aloud, "My dear Amelia, I hope this finds you well and happily settled in your new life. Boston is much the same, though the school misses your influence." Mr. Edwards was finally forced to dismiss his son after 3 more young teachers complained of his improper advances. "Your departure seems to have encouraged others to speak up." Amelia looked up, finding Xavier watching her intently. "Mr. Edwards' son was the reason I lost my position," she explained. "He made unwanted advances, and when I rejected him, he claimed I had behaved inappropriately." Xavier's expression darkened. "So that's why you came west?" She nodded, returning to the letter. "I thought you might enjoy this volume of Mrs. Browning's sonnets, as we often discuss them. I hope you have found the happiness you deserve, dear friend. If your circumstances are not as promised, please know you would be welcomed back now that the Edwards situation has been resolved." Amelia set the letter down, touching the small book of poetry thoughtfully. "Would you go back?" Xavier asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Now that you could have your teaching position again?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with unspoken meanings. Amelia considered it seriously, imagining a return to Boston, to the familiar streets and customs, to a respected position at the school. "No," she said finally, meeting his gaze steadily. "My life is here now." Something flickered in Xavier's eyes, relief perhaps, or something warmer. "I'm glad to hear it," he said quietly. "The children would be devastated to lose you, and—" he hesitated. "So would I." Before Amelia could respond, Mrs. Wilkins entered the kitchen, interrupting the moment. Yet the words lingered, wrapping around Amelia's heart like a promise. The harvest celebration grew closer, consuming much of Amelia's attention. The schoolhouse was decorated with autumn leaves and displays of the children's work. Each child would present something to demonstrate their learning recitations. Some worked on the blackboard, reading passages from their primers, or explaining maps they had drawn. The entire community was involved, with families bringing food for a feast afterward. Even some townspeople from Stein's Pass had been invited, including the doctor who had finally met the baby named partly in his honor, having been too late to assist in the actual delivery. The night before the celebration, Amelia worked late at the schoolhouse, making final preparations. She was arranging the last display when she heard footsteps and turned to find Xavier at the door, carrying a lantern. "Mrs. Wilkins was worried when you didn't come back for supper," he said, entering the schoolhouse. "She sent food." He held up a basket. "I lost track of time," Amelia admitted. "There was so much to finish." Xavier set the basket on a desk and looked around the transformed schoolhouse. "It looks wonderful. The children must be so proud." "They should be. They've worked incredibly hard." She gestured to a display of writing samples. "Look at Thomas Johnson's progress. 3 months ago he couldn't write his name." Xavier studied the careful penmanship with evident appreciation. "You've done something remarkable here, Amelia." "We have," she corrected him. "None of this would exist without your support." He smiled, a rare, unguarded expression that transformed his features. "Partnership suits us, it seems." The word partnership hung between them, rich with possibility. Amelia found herself moving closer to him, drawn by something she could no longer deny. "Xavier," she began, uncertain what she meant to say, only knowing she needed to say something. He turned to her, the lantern light gilding his features. "Yes." But whatever might have happened next was interrupted by the sound of horses outside. Xavier stepped to the window. "Riders coming fast," he said, his posture tensing. "Stay here." He moved swiftly to the door, hand dropping instinctively to the gun at his hip that Amelia sometimes forgot he carried. Outside, voices called his name, urgent but not panicked. "It's Ernesto," Xavier called back to her, relaxing slightly. "Something's happened." Amelia followed him outside to find Ernesto Mendez and 2 ranch hands, their horses lathered from hard riding. "Xavier," Ernesto said grimly, dismounting. "Cattle rustlers hit the north pasture. They've taken maybe 50 head heading for the border." Xavier's expression hardened. "When?" "Just before sunset. Miguel spotted them and rode to tell me. I came straight here." "How many?" Miguel saw 4, but there could be more. Xavier was already striding toward his horse. "Get Johnson and the others. We'll cut them off at Eagle Pass. They'll expect us to follow their trail, but if we ride hard through the night, we can get ahead of them." Amelia stepped forward, alarm rising within her. "Xavier, that's too dangerous. There are at least 4 armed men." He turned to her, his expression softening briefly. "This is cattle country, Amelia. A rancher who won't defend his herd won't have one for long." He swung into the saddle. "Don't worry, we'll be careful." "Be back for the celebration tomorrow," she said, trying to keep her voice light despite the fear gripping her heart. "The children will be devastated if you miss it." He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture that somehow conveyed more than words could have. "I wouldn't dream of disappointing them. Or you." Then he was gone, riding hard into the night with Ernesto and the others, leaving Amelia standing beside the schoolhouse, the lantern casting long shadows across the yard. She barely slept that night, worry gnawing at her. Mrs. Wilkins tried to reassure her, explaining that cattle rustling was an unfortunate reality of ranch life, and that Xavier and his men were experienced in handling such situations. "He's been through worse and come back without a scratch," the housekeeper said, patting Amelia's hand. "That man has more lives than a cat." Morning brought no word, and Amelia forced herself to focus on the celebration preparations. Families began arriving early, excitement evident on every face. The children, dressed in their Sunday best, practiced their presentations one last time while parents arranged food on long tables set up outside. By noon, the celebration was in full swing. The schoolhouse was filled to capacity as the children demonstrated their learning. Each presentation met with enthusiastic applause. Parents beamed with pride, many wiping away tears as their children read or recited or explained their work. Yet despite the joy surrounding her, Amelia found her gaze constantly drawn to the horizon, searching for riders returning from the north. The final presentation was about to begin when a murmur ran through the crowd. Amelia looked up to see people turning toward the schoolhouse door. There stood Xavier, dusty and unshaven, a streak of blood on his sleeve but very much alive. Relief flooded through her so intensely that for a moment she couldn't breathe. He made his way to an empty seat at the back, nodding encouragement to young Sofia Mendez, who was waiting to begin her recitation. The little girl beamed at him before launching into her piece, a poem about freedom that Amelia had helped her select. When the presentations concluded and the feast began, Xavier disappeared again briefly, returning freshly washed and in clean clothes, the blood gone from his sleeve. He moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations on the school's success with quiet pride. Finally, he made his way to Amelia, who was serving cider to a group of children. "You're hurt," she said without preamble, nodding toward the arm that had been bloodied. "Just a scratch," he dismissed. "We recovered the cattle. No serious injuries on either side." "That's not what I asked," she persisted. A flicker of amusement crossed his face. "No, it isn't, but this is your day, Amelia, the school's day. My arm can wait." She wanted to argue but knew this wasn't the time or place. "We'll discuss it later," she promised, a hint of steel in her voice that made him smile. "I look forward to it." The celebration continued into the late afternoon, a resounding success by any measure. As the families began to depart, many stopped to thank Amelia personally for her work with their children. The genuine gratitude in their eyes moved her deeply. "You've brought something precious to Willow Creek," Ernesto Mendez told her, his wife nodding agreement beside him. "Knowledge is a gift that cannot be stolen or lost." By sunset, only the residents of the main house remained. Mrs. Wilkins had gone inside to prepare a light supper, leaving Amelia and Xavier alone at one of the outdoor tables, watching the last golden light fade from the western sky. "Now," Amelia said firmly, "your arm." Xavier sighed but obligingly rolled up his sleeve, revealing a bandaged cut on his forearm. One of the rustlers had a knife. It's clean and shallow. Mrs. Wilkins already fussed over it more than necessary. Amelia examined the bandage, satisfying herself that it was indeed properly dressed. "You might have been killed, but I wasn't," he pointed out reasonably. "That's not." She stopped, struggling to articulate the fear that had gripped her throughout the night and day. "I was afraid," she admitted finally. "Afraid you wouldn't come back." Xavier's expression softened. "Amelia, let me finish," she interrupted. "When I came west, I was seeking security through marriage. Then you gave me independence, and I thought that was all I wanted. But now—" She met his gaze directly. "Now I understand that neither means anything without the right person to share it with." For a moment, Xavier was absolutely still, his blue eyes searching her face. Then, with a gentleness that belied his strength, he reached out to touch her cheek. "I've been falling in love with you since the moment you stood on that auction block, chin high despite everything," he said softly. "But I promised myself I wouldn't speak until you were truly free to choose, until you knew you could walk away if that's what you wanted." Amelia turned her face into his palm, heart racing. "I don't want to walk away." "Then stay," he whispered. "Not as my employee, but as my partner, my wife, if you'll have me." Instead of answering with words, Amelia leaned forward and kissed him. It was a tentative gesture at first, but Xavier responded immediately, his hand sliding to the nape of her neck, drawing her closer. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Xavier pressed his forehead to hers. "I take it that's a yes," Amelia laughed, joy bubbling up inside her. "It's a yes, Xavier Sullivan. Though I warn you, I intend to keep teaching. Your wife will not be conventional." "Thank God for that," he replied with feeling. "Conventional women don't generally rescue other women from auction blocks, deliver babies during floods, or transform cattle ranches with schoolhouses." They might have continued in this vein had Mrs. Wilkins not appeared at the house door, calling them to supper. The knowing smile on the housekeeper's face suggested she had witnessed their exchange, but her only comment was a cheerful, "About time." News of their engagement spread quickly through the ranch community. The families received it with universal approval, many commenting that they had seen it coming for months. Preparations for a wedding began almost immediately, with Mrs. Wilkins taking charge of the arrangements with characteristic efficiency. "Nothing too elaborate," Amelia insisted. "Something simple, here at the ranch, with the people who have become our family." Xavier agreed, adding only that he would send to El Paso for a proper ring and whatever else Amelia might want for the occasion. His only stipulation was that they not wait too long. "Winter will be here soon," he reasoned. "Better to be married before the worst weather sets in." They settled on a date in late November, giving them just enough time for preparations without extending their engagement unnecessarily. The school would continue, of course, but now with the added blessing of a supportive husband waiting at home. The wedding day dawned clear and crisp, the late autumn sunlight bathing Willow Creek in a golden glow. In the guest room that would soon no longer be hers, Amelia dressed with Mrs. Wilkins' help, donning a new gown of deep blue silk that Xavier had ordered from El Paso. "You look beautiful, child," Mrs. Wilkins said, adjusting the simple veil that crowned Amelia's upswept hair. "Xavier won't be able to take his eyes off you." Amelia smiled, touching the silver pendant at her throat, the one she had worn on the auction block, now a symbol of how far she had come. "I never imagined finding this kind of happiness when I came west." "Sometimes the best things in life are those we never thought to ask for," the older woman replied wisely. "Now, are you ready? There's a good man waiting for you." The ceremony took place in the schoolhouse, transformed once again, this time with boughs of evergreen and late-blooming wildflowers. Every family from the ranch attended, along with a few friends from town, including the doctor who had become a regular visitor since the dramatic birth during the flood. Xavier waited at the front of the room, tall and handsome in a new suit, his normally unruly hair tamed for the occasion. When Amelia appeared in the doorway, his expression of wonder and love was everything she could have hoped for. Ernesto Mendez escorted her down the aisle, having offered to stand in for the father she had lost. The children of Willow Creek School formed an honor guard along the aisle, each holding a small bouquet of flowers or a sprig of greenery. The minister from Stein's Pass performed the ceremony, his words simple but meaningful as Xavier and Amelia exchanged vows and rings. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier's kiss was both tender and promising, eliciting cheers and applause from their assembled friends and neighbors. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening, with music and dancing, abundant food, and much laughter. Through it all, Xavier kept Amelia close, his hand often finding hers, his eyes seeking her face as if to reassure himself that this happiness was real. As the festivities wound down, they stood together on the porch of the ranch house, now their house, looking out at the stars emerging in the clear night sky. "Happy, Mrs. Sullivan?" Xavier asked, his arm around her waist. Amelia leaned into his embrace. "More than I ever believed possible." "Good." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Because I intend to spend the rest of my life ensuring you stay that way. As I do for you," she promised, turning in his arms to face him. "Partners, remember." "Partners," he agreed, before claiming her lips in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. In the years that followed, Willow Creek Ranch flourished under their joint stewardship. The school expanded as more families settled in the area, eventually requiring an assistant teacher to help Amelia with the growing number of students. Xavier's cattle operation prospered, allowing them to improve the ranch and invest in the community. Their first child, a son they named Joseph after Amelia's fallen brother, was born almost exactly a year after their wedding. He was followed 2 years later by a daughter, Grace, who inherited her father's blue eyes and her mother's determination. The auction document that had once marked Amelia as unfit became a family story, a testament to how the worst circumstances could sometimes lead to the greatest blessings. Xavier kept the torn pieces in a small box alongside the brass school bell he had given Amelia, symbols of the beginning of their journey together. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Xavier surprised Amelia with a new schoolhouse, larger, sturdier, with proper desks and a small library. Above the door, a brass plaque bore the inscription, "Education is Freedom," dedicated to Amelia Sullivan, who teaches us all to judge for ourselves what is truly valuable. That evening, as they sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard, Amelia reflected on the twists of fate that had brought her to this moment. "You ever think about what might have happened if you hadn't been in Stein's past that day?" she asked, her head resting on Xavier's shoulder. He was quiet for a moment, his hand absently stroking her arm. "Sometimes. But then I remember something my father used to say, that the important thing isn't what happens to you but what you choose to do about it." "Wise words," Amelia murmured. "Yes." Xavier turned to face her, his expression serious despite the smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "But I'll tell you this, bidding on a woman marked unfit was the best decision I ever made." Amelia laughed, the sound blending with the evening breeze rustling through the willows along the creek. "And accepting a proposition from a stubborn cowboy was the best decision I ever made." Their lips met in a kiss that still held all the wonder of the first, a testament to a love born in the most unlikely circumstances, a love that had transformed them both and, in so doing, had created something beautiful and enduring in the wild heart of the West.